Welcome to South Harmon, we glad you here today. Another AMA. Welcome to South Harmon, we glad you here today.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to another Dynasty Team review. I am Eric, and you can find me on Twitter at EricVanickNFL, and this time I am joined by Koopa. Koopa, what's going on, man?
Not much. I'm doing good. I'm ready to get into a team review. Getting to do a team review with you this time.
Yeah,
And
my first one.
anybody that doesn't know, you go up to the top right here, dynastyteamreview.com. You can go, you can sign up, you can have Eric do a team review, you can have me do a team review, you can have Mike or Adam do a team review, and you can pick any two of us you want and mash us together and be able to get multiple perspectives. And I think that's the reason that we were asked to do this today, was to get both of our perspectives on this team.
Yeah, absolutely. And then also, if you want to join us, you're more than welcome to come and join us and ask us any live questions you have as well. So I think that's a really cool thing that we added in.
Yeah,
absolutely. So, all right. So this is going to be a team review for Nrob369 on Sleeper. He previously had gotten one from us before, and he got another one. So appreciate that, Nate. I'm gonna go ahead and pull up the warp here. There it is, warp calculator. All right, make sure we're up and running and good. There it is. Okay, awesome. All right, so kind of looking at this league, well, I should probably pull up his settings that he sent us real quick here. So it is a 12-team, start 11 best ball league. He says it's good running back warp. He would like to low-key compete in 2024. This was his very first best ball startup, was able to trade down a lot and gather a bunch of thirds, got a little extra fab to pick up backup quarterbacks, replacing an injured starter. How would you guys draft this rookie draft, and how would you approach the league now? So, first off, we're just going to kind of look at the warp here. Me and Koopa were kind of talking about this before we started. The warp here is pretty balanced for all four positions. Tight end, we said was a little slight, but everything else pretty balanced.
Mm-hmm. Especially it being best ball. If this was a lineup league and I saw this warp graph, I would be saying that wide receiver and quarterback are heavily above the running back. But with best ball, you have a little bit of the flipping of logic, a little bit of that you want to have some better running backs than you do wide receivers, because you can easily make up wide receivers in the aggregate because of best ball. You just need a wide receiver that's going to catch a 40-yard touchdown pass that day, and boom, now you've got a wide receiver 3 slotting into your lineup. But at running back, you don't tend to get those as often, and so you're more relying on, okay, I know these guys are going to consistently get these amount of points, and so you tend to want to invest a little bit more. And so seeing the running backs close to wide receivers but just below kind of makes me feel about even on them in terms of a 1-year window kind of thing. But then you always have to play the dynasty factor into it, and that people are much more interested in wide receivers than they are running backs. And so depending on your league market, you might end up seeing a league like this, and you just might find yourself getting a ton of running backs rather than wide receivers, just to fill up that team and make sure that you're still filling that position in a good, solid way, because you can build up those wide receivers later.
Absolutely. I mean, I'd still like to probably start as many wide receivers as possible that I can on this team, especially looking at the warp here. I mean, if you just look at wide receiver 7 here was DJ Moore, 1.96 warp. Go to wide receiver 30 here, 1.34 warp for Rashee Rice. So, it is pretty flat here just among, the top 36 wide receivers. I mean, sure, you have your top 5 that exceeded everything, but after that, it was, fairly flat. There's not too much of a difference between those guys. So if I can get as many of those guys from this 1 to 36 range that I can, that's what I'm going to try and do, I think.
Mm-hmm. And so if you turn it over to the A warp per game tab, I like to also look at this range that we see from about, it's running back 10 through 27 or so, where it is super flat at the running back position. And
Right.
that's where I'm going to try and target filling up my running backs,
Right.
because that leaves the value open for those wide receivers that you were just talking about. I want to have as many of those top 36 guys as I can, but we can fill that 10 through 27 range off of these running backs, and those guys tend to come pretty cheap.
Right.
I mean, in there you've got your Brian Robinsons, you've got your Clyde Edwards-Helaire, you got Zamir White, Austin Eckler, Devin Singletary. Like, these are guys that maybe they aren't there every single week, but you know when to start those guys. That's the beauty of running back. And something that Nate told us about this team was that he's accumulated a bunch of draft capital.
Yeah.
And so that's where in a best ball league, you have this extra draft capital. When somebody else has that running back that you want for the next 3 weeks, you're able to go and do that, especially when it counts as you're getting into playoffs and things like that.
Right. And so the table you were mentioning here, RB10 was Joe Mixon at a .11, and if you go all the way over to here to like DeAndre Swift was a .09. Like, this, just look how flat this is from, running back 10 here to running back 30. So, pretty flat tier there. Like you said, I try and get as many of those types of guys in this range right there. Like, I don't absolutely need to have a Christian McCaffrey, a Kyron Williams, Mosters, these guys that were absolutely smashing. But if I could, in my startup draft, just go ahead and select a bunch of guys in this range, I'm totally fine with that. So, and then I'll hammer the wide receivers and focus on the more important positions. So I agree with you on that.
Yeah, and the reason you can avoid going to the Christian McCaffrey route is if you pull up the wide receiver line, just look how high those wide receivers are compared to Christian McCaffrey. If you're looking at, okay, I want to, should I get Christian McCaffrey, or I could just go and get myself a Tyreek Hill. I could get myself an Amon-Ra St. Brown. You can get those guys that are in that range that they aren't that value different, especially when you're talking what people are going to need in order to trade for them during the season, or potentially what you need in a startup. Yeah, Christian McCaffrey's a little bit lower than Amon-Ra, but Amon-Ra is also so young, you're going to have him for years and years and years. Dynasty-wise, it's a good choice to invest in it at the wide receiver position, and because the running back doesn't dominate, you want to put your investment in that longer term, so that way you can have year after year after year of competing.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I pulled up the wide receivers here like you were talking, and they are just a slight tick above most of these running backs until you get to the end here. They're about equal, and then the wide receivers kind of take over again. So wide receiver pretty much king in this league for me. We'll take a look at the quarterback too. Obviously, quarterback is right up there with the wide receiver. So, quarterback, wide receiver are the two most important positions for me. I want to make sure that I am always very strong in those positions. And then, tight end is just a slight tick below the running backs in this league until you get to the shit part, then it's really falls off. Go back to the A-Warp graph. Yeah, so this is the full A-Warp graph for the whole season. And yeah, I mean, kind of just what we talked about, wide receivers and quarterbacks pretty much on par with each other until you get to that dead range. Derek Carr is that's usually where the drop off is. It goes Lawrence to Derek Carr. In most of these leagues that we've looked at this year, it goes down to this range, and that's where you're kind of struggling. But there's some guys in here like Kirk Cousins, Justin Fields, who I expect to maybe make a tick up this coming season.
Yeah, and the way I also like to look at that too is kind of bouncing back and forth between that A-Warp graph and the A-Warp per game graph. So we see that, okay, there was a clear top 16 this past year. But if you look at A-Warp per game, that drop off is really starts to decline around a quarterback 24. So what we're seeing is, okay, on a weekly basis, I want to have multiple top 24 quarterbacks, and I'm just going to expect that at any given point, a quarter of those guys are going to drop out over the course
Yeah.
of the season, whether it's due to injury, whether it's due to not playing well enough for their team, whatever.
Yeah.
And so I want to be aiming for having the top 24 quarterbacks because if they play the whole season, they're going to end up being those top 16 across the full season of A-Warp.
Right. And
And
if you
so,
look through this top like 24 too, there's some like Nick Mullins in here. Like there was Mitch Trubisky. I thought this was a mistake. How the fuck is Mitch Trubisky this high?
I mean, Mitch Trubisky, I think he didn't have many games where
Right.
he was because the beautiful thing about A-Warp and the reason that I've made it the default even for best ball leagues is it accounts for when we weren't expecting somebody to be starting. And so nobody was expecting Mitch Trubisky to be starting until the couple weeks that he did start. And the couple weeks that he did play, he happened to do decently. And so he got himself up in there. I also think it helped. I'm trying to remember exactly what weeks he started, but he started weeks that like a bunch of guys were on bye. So that
Right.
also helped get him even higher um, in the actual warp values. But
Right.
you have things like that where you end up with some amount of okay, these are going to fit in weird ranges where it's like I don't understand. Like, oh, why is Andy Dalton? I know is somebody that is pretty
Yeah.
high up. Yeah, he's a quarterback 12, and
Yeah. Joe Flacco, quarterback 3.
yeah, and so you're going to have some people like that where you're like, okay, these guys are obviously really high up. They didn't play the whole season. But it helps you give an understanding of how many quarterbacks on a weekly basis are going to be worth it. And so if you're targeting those right guys, you're able to make up some amount of okay, I don't have the best quarterbacks in the league.
Right.
So that way you don't need to overinvest in having potentially like multiple first round quarterbacks and multiple like third and fourth rounds in order to build out a depth or something. You can see here you can build out that depth with a bunch of these like lower end guys who are just who are there kind of as a little bit of like a cannon fodder for your team.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, before we switch over to looking at Nate's roster here, I just want to pull up available players and see if there is anybody. Oh, wrong one. If there's anybody worth a fuck, to be honest. So we have 21 total here. Just kind of looking over the names here. Nelson Aguilar could be interesting as like a deep guy. Probably more of a roster clogger, but out of everybody on this list, I'd probably say he would be the one I'd be most interested in.
Yeah, I don't see too many people on this list. Potentially a Trenton Irwin. Like he could also be somebody to just load onto the team as a hey, what if T Higgins doesn't come back and they don't solidify the receiver, or even if a Tyler Boyd doesn't come back, like I could see Trenton
Right.
Irwin slotting in there.
Yep.
So those would be the guys to look at and just see, and we'll see how many open roster spots he has and everything like that
Right.
to see what sort of things he could fit into his team as well.
Right. Absolutely. All right. So we're gonna go back over to here, and we're gonna stop that. We're gonna pull up his team right here. All right, there we go. So already have Nate's team up. So right now you're ranked number 1 with picks, so that's great news. Players, you're ranked 9th, not great. Dynasty rank, you're 1. Redraft rank, you're 11. So you means you probably got a lot of really good young players on this team, and kind of just looking at the beginning here, you do. So that's always a good sign. Let's go ahead and start at quarterback. So you have C.J. Stroud, one of the top 5 or 6 starting quarterbacks in the league right now. So that's a great start. I like having that. Anthony Richardson is your super flex. So in my opinion, you have to top 10, we'll say, quarterbacks for you to start. So love having that kind of a start. What do you think?
I really like that. And then you kind of tack on who his third one is, and Bryce Young as well.
Bryce Young, yep.
Like that quarterback position is locked down really well. Between those three guys, they're all young, but they have all shown an ability to produce. Bryce Young, maybe not as much, but if we want to run along the logic that like, hey, maybe a new coaching staff this year, especially with the quarterback whisperer that what's his name, the head coach there.
Dave Canellis.
Yeah, Canales. Like Canales, he's a bit of a quarterback whisperer, and Bryce Young might come back and put up great numbers this coming year. And so having those three is a good solid set of three quarterbacks. Right. You have the Daniel Jones, Jarrett Stidham, Tyrod Taylor as your backups afterwards. I'm not saying that you need to fix anything there. I actually think that, but I also don't think you need to sell anything. Like right. I think that having Daniel Jones as a nice little dart throw works great. And if Daniel Jones comes back and does really well this upcoming season, and you end up in a spot where like, hey, I'm looking like I can compete, that is where you can potentially look at selling one of those four. Load in another backup quarterback that has come off of waivers, that has taken over for somebody else, and that's how you can backfill that fourth quarterback spot. But with the value that you have here at the quarterback position, I really like how this is balanced out.
Right. And then, like you kind of were talking about earlier in the A-Warp graph, we kind of want 4 top 24 quarterbacks to, cycle in and out of our best ball lineup every single week. And having Bryce Young and Daniel Jones on your bench, who definitely can potentially, fit into your lineup with some spike weeks at some point. So I think this is a really good, group of 4. I like what he's got going on here.
Yeah.
Then you have Stidham and Tyrod Taylor. I think those guys are more than fine to have on my bench right now. Tyrod is a free agent. Stidham with Broncos cutting Russell Wilson today. Stidham is at least the backup, right? I mean, right now he's listed as a starter, but he's probably most likely going to be the backup. But hey, on that off chance they, draft McCarthy and he's not ready and Stidham beats him out, you might have a 5th quarterback here. So,
or they try to go to free agency. And then they mess it up, and they end up putting in the backup anyway, just because the starter's not cutting it. Like all the quarterbacks on your team are either good, solid quarterbacks that are going to start next year, or there's a clear path to where they will be playing.
Absolutely.
And that's what you want to see on your best ball teams. Is you need to see the clear path of how that quarterback will play in order to have them rostered.
Absolutely. So, yeah, really like your quarterback position and where you're sitting. Let's go up to the running back spot. So you have to start 2 running backs. So right now you have Keaton Mitchell, Tank Bigsby as your starters, and J.K. Dobbins and Cam Akers as flexes. So, woof.
Yeah.
I mean, Akers, Dobbins, definitely 2 guys I just don't want to really be rostering at all with the amount of injuries that they've had. Keaton Mitchell's coming off a serious injury too. Bigsby was bad. So, yeah, the running back spot right now is not looking good. Let's see who else you have. Eric Gray, Samaje Perine, Deuce Vaughn, Evan Hull, Kevin Harris, and that is it. So, yeah, the running back position is going to need a lot of help.
Yes. This is where I start to see the signs of why this team has a redraft rank of 11.
Yes.
Because not only are we looking at, the top running backs are Keaton Mitchell and Tank Bigsby, but the fact that J.K. Dobbins and Cam Akers are still slotting into your flex spots. There's in a best ball league, depth is such a huge thing. And the way I like to play is I like to have double of the number of slots that are in my starting lineup as solid pieces on my team.
Right.
So in this case, I need to start 2 running backs. So I need to have at minimum 4 solid running backs who I know are going to get at least like probably 12 or 13 touches a game, like at a bare minimum.
Mhm.
I would say that guy would be Keaton Mitchell, but he tore his ACL. And
Okay.
so he's probably not gonna be back for the start of the season, or if he is, he's gonna be slowed down. It'll take him a little bit to get caught up. And then everyone else, I don't even see how they get to that target number, right, where they get to 12 or 13. And so if I'm looking at, okay, what would I need to do to transform this running back room? I'm going to have to invest a lot into it. Like
Yep.
you can try to get savvy, and if you make some good moves, like maybe like if you end up doing a trade and you notice the guy has like an Ezekiel Elliott sitting on his team, like you might be able to get him added as a throw-in, and because he's somebody that could easily go to somewhere and end up getting 10 to 15 touches a game,
Mhm.
kind of like he did last year in New England. But you're going to need to do a lot of things like that. And I don't want to just go out and spend all my draft capital building up my running back room, because I also need to use that draft capital to build up my wide receiver room.
Right.
Because as I've kind of already alluded to, if we're having J.K. Dobbins and Cam Akers in the flex, that wide receiver room is also not doing that well.
Right, right. And he did mention to us as well that he has a lot of extra, I think, seconds and thirds. I think mainly he said thirds. And this running back class, it might not have like the superstar talents, but there's a lot of really good running backs in this class that I like that are going to have roles. So I think with a lot of those third round picks, I'm just going to be hammering the running backs because you need all the darts you can get.
Yes, you'll want to hammer them, but know that those guys are not going to be getting your team into contention now.
Right.
And so uh, I am totally okay with this team with how young these quarterbacks are. That and looking at this wide receiver, like everything on this team is young.
Yeah.
I don't want to push in for vets to try and win this year. I don't want to
Right.
overdo it. And I think the way to not overdo it is to invest heavily and own a draft class.
Hmm.
And the way to own a good draft class in terms he has so many second round picks, so many third round picks. We'll get to exactly what all those are a little bit later. But investing a lot of those at the running back position can give you enough dart throws that some of those guys will turn out to be useful. And
Hmm.
that's how you build up that running back position. But you don't need to spend anything premium in order to do that.
Yeah, I agree with that for sure, especially in this draft. Like, there's no Brees Hall, Jameer Gibbs at all, so definitely going to be using some of those late picks on some running backs. Wide receivers. So he does have Rashee Rice, Tank Dell, Josh Downs in his starting 3 spots. So 3 young receivers that he hit on in last year's draft. And kind of get your thoughts on this. What do you think about stacking? So he's got Dell and Stroud, and he's got Downs and Richardson. What do you think about stacking? Do you like it or no?
I don't like to force it, but if I
Okay.
have it, I like it. So
Okay.
like I'm not going to try and trade away Josh Downs to get an equivalent wide receiver,
Right.
because I have Anthony Richardson. And in a similar vein, like if I am trading with somebody and say they have Jonathan Mingo on their team, I might choose Jonathan Mingo to be my extra little kicker that comes back to me rather than choosing somebody else, because I know I have Bryce Young.
Correct.
Especially in best ball, where we're talking about guys having explosive games is what really helps your team. What better way to try and make your explosion even more than to have 2 players that are going to work in tandem with each other?
Right. Okay. And then his only backup receiver, he has Demarcus Robinson. So he has a total of 4 wide receivers on this team, which is not
Mhm.
ideal with the way that we talked about wide receivers at the beginning of the show. Yeah, you got a solid, nice 3 here to start, but you're going to need to build on this a lot more, in my opinion.
Yes, and so I just looked at the warp calculator, what it says roster construction should be, and it says that we should have 8 wide receivers on this team.
Okay.
So at a bare minimum, regardless of how good they are, there should be at least 4 more guys on this team that are wide receivers.
Right.
And so something that I also love to look at whenever I look at somebody's teams is if you click where it says Dynasty Picks Rank, you can choose one called Open Roster,
Okay.
and then on Dynasty Players Rank, you can choose one that says Waivers Open. And I like doing that because now you can see, oh, he's got 4 open roster spots and waivers are currently open.
Oh,
So
okay.
first of all, at any point, you should look at it. You should go to the lab on the South Harmon website and look at all of your leagues. Where do you have open roster spots and the waivers are currently open? Because that means right now you can go and get players onto your roster. You are leaving free value on the table by not doing that. And so in a team like this, okay, we've already identified we're short by wide receivers for the amount that we want, and we just said we want 8 of them, and we only have 4 on this roster. So
Yeah.
when you see this review, the first thing you should probably be doing right now is just pausing the video, pulling up this league on Sleeper, and choosing the best 4 wide receivers that are
Yeah.
available in free agency, and just putting in claims for them.
Yeah, and we talked about Aguilar and Irwin before we came over to here. So there's 2 of them right there. So go find yourself 2 more receivers that you like that are available and add them to your team too. Okay, and then tight ends. We'll go over that one quickly. He's got just Mark Andrews and Tucker Kraft, and right now he's got Kraft into a flex spot because honestly, that's probably what would happen if the league, we were playing tomorrow. So, fine having Mark Andrews. This is probably one of your pieces though that you could probably trade to get an upgrade at running back or another receiver. Kind of tearing down from Andrews in my opinion.
Yeah, it depends entirely on what you can get out of other people in your league. But Mark Andrews is somebody that, to give you some names of equivalent warp guys from last season: Alvin Kamara, Tank Dell. Although I think you already have Tank Dell on this team. And Kirk Cousins was equivalent in a warp per game. Jordan Love, like there's it was mentioned that hey, this league has a tight end premium. You can also kind of see what do people value Mark Andrews as,
Right.
and the guys that I mentioned. The reason I mentioned them is because they aren't necessarily thought of as world beaters, and Mark Andrews a year ago was thought of as like, if you have Mark Andrews, you've got the tight end position on lockdown. In this league, there's not, especially it being best ball, there's not a huge advantage to having a Mark Andrews. You can make up Mark Andrews really easily by having an aggregate of like 3 or 4 other tight ends who are gonna slot into your lineup. Tucker Kraft can be one of those 3 or 4 that you have.
Right.
And you have to remember that you only need to fill 1 tight end spot. Yes, we do have the flex spots. If you have multiple of them hit in 1 week, they'll come in and fill a flex spot for you. But having Mark Andrews there and having so much value invested in him when you have a lot of other holes on this team is a little bit of a value sink, and it's only going to get worse as Mark Andrews gets older. Like we already saw this past season, he didn't play that much. He lost a ton of value from where he was a year ago to where he is now. And don't be married to holding on for the ride of saying Mark Andrews is going to come back, because if he doesn't come back to the form of being a number 1 or number 2 tight end of the league, he's going to continue to fall down in terms of his overall value. and that's not the way that you want to be playing in a best ball league that doesn't have a high tight end premium.
So how I would do it personally is I would try and go to I would try and find like a tight end that's in the lower ranges that I like. So one guy that I do like coming into this year is Davis Allen, who's probably going to start for the Rams for a little bit. Showed off pretty good. I'm sure there's some other tight ends that aren't coming to mind at the moment, but like a Davis Allen type, if I could go to that team and say, hey, you give me Davis Allen, and then find another receiver or a running back, whichever is working better for you at the time. So let's say like a younger receiver, um, Deontay Johnson type. Maybe not Deontay Johnson. Maybe George Pickens. We'll go with him. So if I can get like a Pickens and Davis Allen to give up Mark Andrews and kind of fill two spots there, if I can, that's kind of what I would be trying to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like the going and getting that receiver because you're going to need those stronger receivers.
Yes.
And then you can get that target a specific kicker tight end. And what I mean by kicker tight end, I mean that extra little piece that makes the trade worth it for you.
Right.
And you get there's a few of those guys out there. There's a Davis Allen. I've been a big fan of Johnny Munt is being one of those guys that's you can have at the beginning of the season who's going to be covering for an injury.
Yeah.
And
Juwan Johnson finished really good last year. That wouldn't be a guy I would mind going after. Noah Fant is a free agent. That's one of the guys I like targeting too because people think he's dog shit now, but he's still 26. And if you look at some of his early years, they're like some of the best for a young tight end in the league. Like the guy didn't forget how to play tight end. He just was in a shitty offense for 2 years.
Mm-hmm. And so, but the important thing to remember is after you trade away Mark Andrews and you get one of those guys back, that doesn't mean you're done. It means that, okay, now I need to invest a little bit more into just filling out those 3 or 4 tight ends and continue to get them as little kickers here and there. And we already talked about filling up your roster with 4 more wide receivers, and now we're saying, all right, we're going to increase the number of tight ends that you have by 2 or 3 more. That should be telling you, hey, I think the number of running backs that I have on this team isn't quite right. And you should be looking at, okay, is Kevin Harris really going to do anything for your team? Is Evan Hull really going to do anything for your team? Like, those guys are going to be zeros week after week unless something drastically changes. Right. And so those are the guys that you can look at cutting off your team. Reduce that running back number down a little bit so that way you can fill them up with guys that are actually going to be playing.
Right. Yeah, so like we talked about a few minutes ago, you had the 4 open spots. I'd be trying to fill those with 4 wide receivers if I can, like Aguilar, Trent Irwin, stuff like that. Just some other younger receivers. I just pulled up my rankings really quick. Like you could maybe go for JSN. You could go for Jaden Reed, George Pickens. Those guys are all in this kind of tier. There's some older guys, but I probably would try and stay young. If you can maybe try, for Drake London, that wouldn't be a bad one. I don't know if that gets it done, but somewhere in those range, like JSN, Jaden Reeds, George Pickens, that's kind of who I'd be targeting and kind of see what tight end they have available to you that they could kick back. Do they have a Juwan Johnson? Do they have a Jelani Woods, a Cade Otton, Hunter Henry, Tyler Conklin, guys like that? If you can get one of those guys back, I would be trying to do that. All right, so let's look at the draft picks now. So I believe this is one of the leagues he told me before that I had reviewed for him, and he said this was the 111 draft pick. So he has 102, 106, 110, and 111 in the first round. Second round, he has 202, 207, 210, 211, 212, 301, 302, 307, 309, and 404, 406. So this 210, he's got 4 picks right in a row there, so that could be really nice. Actually, 5 picks in a row. That'll be really nice to fill those running back and wide receiver spots for sure. But let's start with the top at the 102. I mean, you don't really need the quarterback. I'm hoping the team that has 101 needs Caleb Williams personally.
I sitting here at 102, I just tend to assume that whoever has 101 is going to go quarterback in a Superflex league.
Right.
And so the guy at 101 takes Caleb. I would be sitting here at 102 and I would be shopping to the 103 and 104 owners, trying a little harder on the 104 owner potentially, of trying to bait them into getting a bidding war to get their choice of quarterback over each other.
Mm.
It might work, it might not work, but if you can get yourself a good offer that is like, okay, I'm able to move back from 102 to 104, and I can get them to toss me. Maybe it's a late for, like, maybe I can get the 112 to do that. Maybe I can get 2 early seconds. I don't know exactly who would be interested in doing those all those sorts of things. But
Right.
okay, I just looked at I am Ferg, like he has the 103 and the 112. If I can get him to spend the 112 to force to force himself to move up that one pick to prevent whoever has the 104 from taking that quarterback out from him, that's something I would go for. But if I can't get that, I think I'm going to end up going Marvin Harrison Jr.
Right.
I think you're in one of those situations where you kind of need to bluff to all of your league mates and make them think that you're willing to take the quarterback. But I don't think taking the quarterback is in fact the right move. The
Right.
wide receiver is valuable enough in this league. You don't need to take the quarterback, and you have such huge holes at the wide receiver position. You take the best wide receiver on the board, and that's how you go. But if you
Right.
move back to 104, even if the guy at 103 takes Marv or somebody else comes up and takes Marv, there's still Malik Neighbors. He's still really, really good. And then, um, and so I think you can kind of be flexible in that range and see if you can bait somebody into willing to come up and a couple spots in order to get that quarterback from you.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think the answer is let me trade the 102 and I'm going to get the 108 and the 201 and the 204 and the 20. Like, I'm not going to take a ton of later picks. I'm
Right.
really only willing to move back to the 103 or the 104, maybe the 105.
Right.
But
Yeah, I agree with you on that.
I need a lot to move back to that 105 even.
Right.
So that's the kind of game that I would play with this 102 that you have here, because you're in that blessed position of having these really solid quarterbacks.
Right. Yeah, because I'm kind of looking at it as I have 2 picks in the top 6. There's 3 quarterbacks, 3 receivers. I'm guaranteed 2 of them right now. I'm with you though. Like, yeah, Marvin Harrison is, everyone's talking about he's a generational talent, all this stuff. Malik Neighbors is pretty good, and a lot of people have talked about he's just as good as Marvin Harrison. I've seen, like, Lance Zierlein's mock today had Neighbors before Marvin Harrison in the draft. So, it's not out of the realm of possibility that, like, if you can move down from 102 to 104 and get Neighbors, you still might be getting the best receiver in the draft. He might be better than Marvin Harrison. I think Harrison's value is always going to be higher because of the name and all the hype that he's gotten. But shit, you might have Neighbors who's ends up better than Harrison, and you get all this extra draft capital out of it. And if you pull that off, let's say you move from 102 to 104, you grab Neighbors at 104, and then at 106, I'm taking Odunze too. I'll take both of them.
Yeah, and if the person at 105 decides to take a Dunze in front of you, you can always take the third quarterback. And so in this case, potentially that's Drake May or Jaden Daniels, or depending on how all the stuff with JJ McCarthy goes, maybe it's JJ McCarthy. But you can always take that quarterback and roll that later on. There's it's a really I really like the 106 and 107 picks in this year's rookie drafts just because you're right at that edge of that massive tier break. It makes it much easier to just take somebody, and if nobody's willing to give you an offer that you want.
I agree. Um, and then like 110, 111, you're probably looking at maybe like Keon Coleman. You're looking at maybe that's where the first running backs are going to go, like Trey Benson, Jonathan Brooks. You're going to probably need, one or two of those guys too. So I don't mind like going there, shopping with the wide receivers. I doubt Brian Thomas would be there at 110, but he could be.
If he went to a bad landing spot, he could end up there, would be my guess.
Right. Yeah, I think like Xavier Worthy with his speed probably moved up into the first round. AD Mitchell might be up there too. So you have some options there. But I would be filling it with wide receivers probably at the top, and then unless I could like Trey Benson or Jonathan Brooks, one of these guys get to a really good landing spot, and then 202, 07, 10, 12, 211. I'm pretty much just hammering wide receivers and running backs this entire draft. There's a couple quarterbacks I like, so you can maybe take like one quarterback that you like. If they land in like a good spot, like a guy that I like to take, or I'm going to like to take, is Jordan Travis or Devin Leary. A guy like that. If they land in a good spot, I wouldn't mind taking a shot at like one of those guys. But you need so much help at running back and wide receiver that I'm going to be focusing these picks mainly on wide receivers and running backs. Another question I have for you, Koopa, is yeah, he has a ton of picks, so like he has 4 open roster spots, so let's count 406, 404, 309, 307. Then he's got to cut a lot of players.
Yes. So I was just thinking the same thing. So I was looked at his roster. I counted 7 players that I would be okay with cutting immediately if it weren't for the fact that I would need to find replacements for them.
Right.
So add up that 7 and add up the 4 missing roster spots. So we've got 11 total. So the number of draft picks that he has is 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. He has 15 draft picks.
Right.
So already in terms of what am I looking to do in this draft? So I talked about, okay, let's have the 102 and maybe get the 104 and the 112. Well, that actually turns me off a little bit from wanting the 112 now, because that's just another draft pick I have to make this year. I would be interested in, okay, can I maybe try and get the 104 and their 26 first? Can I roll some of these later picks into future years? Maybe there's somebody that we're talking about that 5-pick stretch from 210 to 302. If there's somebody that's like, oh man, this guy, I just can't be without him, I'd be totally open to just being like, hey, I'll give you the 210 for your future second, because it's a pick I don't need to make now. And you're gonna have to be a little aggressive because of the fact that you're, with the number of picks that you have, you're essentially 4 spots over right now. Right. With before we've added the four wide receivers off of waivers. You add those 4, now you're 8 slots over. Like there's a lot of maneuvering that you have to do to either consolidate these picks into better picks, or the better way to do it is to try and push it to future years. Yep. You already have 2025, and Eric's already pulled it up because he was thinking along the same wavelength as me, where you've got an extra second, a couple extra thirds, you've got some extra fourths. See if you can accumulate more of those. There might be some managers that are being a little stingy on those, so push it out to 2026. Like, get some of those 2026 seconds and thirds and fourths in exchange for the picks that are right now, just so you aren't over on the total number of roster spots. Because the last thing you want to do is make a pick to then immediately cut the player. Like, that's just a total waste.
All right, so like another thing that I like to do as well is like, you get on the clock at 309, there isn't somebody there you like. I don't mind saying, hey, any type in the chat, hey, any future 2025 third, you get this pick right now. Somebody was going to offer it to you. You just accept it. 20. Hey, anybody want this 404 pick? Any 2025 fourth round pick gets it. Somebody will offer it to you. Just hit accept. That's one thing you can do. Another thing you can do is wouldn't mind consolidating some of these picks. Can I give up 3 of these picks to move up to a higher pick? Can I give up 301, 302, 307 to get to like 205? Something like that. Is somebody willing to accept 3/3 for a pick? Like, yeah, I know you have some holes, but you also you have too many draft picks minus the roster spots there. So I don't mind doing like a 3-for-1 if I can like move 3 of these picks and then kind of look at the tier breaks in the rookie picks there of like who's going to be available where and move up into like that range. So that's another thing I like doing. So if you could move up, from this 110 up to 105 somehow, and you give up like 110 and I don't care, give up all these thirds. 3 of these thirds, whatever they want. If they want to take 3/3 and the 110 and you move up to 105, I'll do that. Something like that, or with seconds, you can throw like the 210 and 212 and the 110 to move up to 105. I'm fine with that. I mean, your team's gonna need to free up some of these draft picks because you're not gonna have enough roster spots to draft all these.
Yeah, and so like even looking at the guy who currently has the 105, that's Fantasy King 8. He's got both the 105 and the 107.
Okay.
But he only has a total of 3, 4, 5, 6. He only has 7 draft picks total.
Okay.
So like that's somebody you could potentially give some extra draft picks to. And I'm looking at the bottom of his team. He's got a bunch of guys that could easily be cut candidates.
Right.
And so you can go in and try to offer for that 105 or that 107 to like consolidate, get yourself up into that range. Where I was talking about, there's a pretty clear tier break there's going to be one at the 106 or 107. It really depends on. It looks like from how JJ McCarthy did at the combine that he might have vaulted himself up to where we're going to say the tier break is at the 107. And so if you can get yourself an extra pick in that range, that's going to let you get either that extra wide receiver. Maybe you can come out of it with all 3 wide receivers if you have 102, 105, 106. Or if you can't do that, you're getting one of those quarterbacks. And that's just an extra guy that when the season comes, you now have 4 really solid, really young first or second year quarterbacks. And so if one of them does end up busting, maybe Bryce Young doesn't. He isn't as good as we thought he was, and he's just a first overall bust. Or maybe something else happens where, hey, one of those guys gets injured. You now aren't forced into immediately trying to flip him for somebody that is actually playing because you had that extra young quarterback and you can just continue to roll with it.
Right. I agree with that. Yeah, I mean, it's talking about tiers real quick too. Like you said with McCarthy, could make it the 107. People love Brock Bowers. Brock Bowers is going to be in there too. So that's like the 108. And I think with the way Brian Thomas had his combine too, and people like him, I think he's going to be go in the mid first round or in the 20s or somewhere. He could easily be in the 108, pretty locked in tier. So I could see maybe this extending out to 108, 109 even.
Yeah, and especially this being a tight end premium league, I have found just from experience that if you put tight end premium in the league's name like it is here, tight ends are going to go higher. Right. It doesn't matter what the tight end premium is, but if you talk about if it's always on their mind, oh, we've got a tight end premium in this league every single time they open it up. That's going to that'll probably cause Bowers to get pushed all the way up into maybe he might be the person taken at 105.
Exactly.
And that just means it's an extra pick for you to take for the thing that you want and the thing that matters, which is getting those high value wide receivers.
Right. Absolutely. But yeah, I mean that's pretty much what I would do with this team. Anything more you want to add, Koopa, before we get on out of here?
Um, I just wanted to add that like you've got a lot of good picks for this year. But the play is not to try and push in all of your assets and become a competitor.
Right.
Like there's a reason you have the dynasty rank of number 1 overall. It's because you have all of those assets that are going to play really well for your team. But you want to try and build your dynasty. You don't want to force your team into a 1 or 2 year window.
Mm-mm.
You could force your team into a 1 year window and make it one of those like we're either winning this year or we're blowing it all up next off season. But
Right.
you have all the perfect assets to build a team that is able to stick around for 4 or 5 years. Like you look at the quarterbacks that you have, look at the wide receivers you're going to be able to draft. Like you can have a really solid core of a team that you're going to be able to make playoffs year after year after year. And then it's just a matter of, okay, getting lucky with injuries, getting being able to make some good in-season moves with all the extra 25 picks that you have, or the 26 picks that hopefully you'll be able to accumulate, and be able to roll that team into something that's going to be able to compete with those teams that you think of as those championship contenders now as they're starting to fall off.
Yeah. And, like you said earlier, too, if you trade some of those 2024 picks and get a, 2025 pick back, you already got this nice treasure chest of 2025 picks going. So you can use that in multiple ways. Obviously, you can use them to draft next year. You can buy pieces during the season if your team starts doing a little bit better than we expect. If, let's say, I don't really expect this to happen, but if Dobbins and Akers come back and actually do something, Keaton Mitchell does something, maybe your team, has a good run of injuries and you don't have a lot of injuries, you might be able to buy some pieces during the season too with some of these thirds if it comes to that. But I would say be patient. You have a lot of good assets, draft picks for this year. You have good draft picks for next year as well. Your team still needs a lot of work at running back. You still need to add depth to wide receiver. But other than that, I mean, I think you have a good, solid foundation going right now. Just gotta. I don't think you're ready to contend this year, but getting a couple extra pieces this year will help you get towards contending maybe next year in 2025.
Yes.
That's kind of what I'm looking at. So, all right. Well, that is it for me and Koopa. Remember, if you guys want a Dynasty Team review, go to dynastyteamreview.com up top there. Like you said, we talked about earlier, myself, Koopa, Adam, Mike, any of us would be willing to do a review for you if you want 2 of us or just 1 of us. If you want to join us, you can do that as well. So check out dynastyteamreview.com. All the information is on there. Anything you want to add, Koopa, before we wrap it up?
Just go check out, go sign up for a team review if you want that. If not, go to southharmonff.com. Check out the tools that we used in this review, and sign up for the Patreon and join the Discord and talk to us there.
Yeah, absolutely. A warp tool that we showed off today. Koopa's the brainchild behind that. And then the lab that we've been showing off here for the last half hour or so with the picks and looking at rosters, that's all free. Just go on the South Harmon FF website and you can play with this. It's just for sleeper leagues right now, but it is a fantastic league manager type tool that you can play with. So I definitely recommend that. But yeah, if you guys are interested, dynastyteamreview.com. And we will see you next time. See ya.